Staying in bed is the best treatment for colds and flu.
Johnson Yardmaster Spray Foam Fertilizer.
Crayola markers in a rainbow of colors.
We once trusted our homes, our schools, even our bodies to things that are now banned, and we never saw the danger coming. How did everyday life in the 1970s hide risks so big we can barely believe we lived through them? Leaded gasoline was the scent of every gas station and the invisible cloud trailing every school bus. It made cars run smoother and engines knock less, so people thought it was a miracle fuel. You'd roll down the windows, sit in the back seat without a seatbelt, and breathe it all in like it was part of the road trip experience. Kids pumped gas. Adults wiped their hands with a rag and got right back behind the wheel. The lead helped your engine, but it quietly poisoned everything else: air, soil, and especially young brains. Over time, researchers found links between lead exposure and learning disabilities, developmental delays, and even violent behavior later in life. But in the 1970s, it was standard. Unleaded options only started to pop up near the end of the decade, and most people ignored them. Gas smelled strong. It meant power. It meant you were going somewhere. Nobody questioned it. Until the studies started piling up and regulations followed. Leaded gas was phased out over time and officially banned in the United States in 1996, long after many of us had already filled our lungs with it. But if gasoline filled the air, the very buildings we lived in were just as dangerous and hiding something even harder to see. Asbestos ceiling tiles and insulation were practically a design trend in the 1970s. You saw those popcorn ceilings and fuzzy-looking pipe wrappings in homes, schools, offices, everywhere. Nobody warned you not to touch it. Nobody wore masks when cutting into it. In fact, it was marketed as a safety feature, fire-resistant, soundproof, and easy to install. It was the miracle material that builders swore by, and people loved how quiet it made things. Kids sat through classes under ceilings full of it. Parents hung out in basements lined with it. But what no one knew, or chose to ignore, was how the fibers could break loose, float into your lungs, and stay there forever. Asbestos exposure doesn't cause immediate symptoms. It creeps in years later, showing up as mesothelioma or lung disease long after the danger is gone. Once science caught up, the lawsuits started. Suddenly, that fluffy insulation was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Contractors had to wear hazmat suits just to remove it, and homeowners were left wondering how many years they had breathed it in. Today, it's banned in most uses and strictly regulated in others. But back then, it was part of the wallpaper of life. And if the walls and ceilings weren't enough, your first aid kit might have been just as questionable. Mercury thermometers were in every medicine cabinet, usually tucked behind a box of cotton balls or a half-used bottle of rubbing alcohol. They looked like tiny magic wands, glass, delicate, and filled with shimmering silver liquid. Getting your temperature taken meant shaking it down like a maraca, then holding it under your tongue without accidentally biting it in half. But if one broke, no big deal. You'd gather up the scattered beads of mercury with a paper towel or chase them across the bathroom floor for fun. The liquid rolled like little metal marbles and seemed totally harmless. It was even mesmerizing, but that shiny stuff is toxic. Breathing in mercury vapor, especially in small enclosed rooms, can damage your lungs, brain, and kidneys. And yet, in the 1970s, nobody worried. Pediatricians used them daily. Schools had them on hand. And the warnings? Barely a whisper. Once digital thermometers became cheaper and more reliable, the mercury version faded away. Today, even the tiniest spill triggers a full hazmat response. But back then, it was just another part of being sick. And if you were sick at home in the 70s, chances are you were surrounded by something just as colorful and even more dangerous. Lead-based house paint was on everything, from the trim around your bedroom window to the alphabet blocks you chewed on. It came in brilliant colors: fire engine red, bright yellow, deep green. The more vibrant, the more lead. It was marketed as durable and washable, perfect for messy kids. And boy, did it chip. You'd peel it off windowsills out of boredom or scrape it with your nails without thinking twice. It crumbled into dust that settled into the carpet, got tracked into kitchens, and ended up in the air. Small hands touched it, then mouths. It didn't smell weird. It didn't taste odd. It just quietly poisoned millions of children across the country, lowering IQs and increasing behavioral issues without a single obvious symptom. Entire neighborhoods, especially older ones, were coated in the stuff. Lead paint wasn't banned in residential use until 1978, and even after that, it stayed in homes for decades. Removing it required hazmat suits and special permits, and still, many families had no idea it was even there. It was a silent danger, one that hid in plain sight and looked great doing it. And while the walls might have been risky, the pajamas you wore to bed came with their own fire-breathing surprise. Flame-retardant pajamas with PBDEs were supposed to be the ultimate kid-safe sleepwear. You'd slip into those polyester two-pieces printed with race cars or unicorns, and your parents could sleep easy, knowing you were protected. After all, they were labeled flame-resistant, right? But what they didn't say was what made them that way. A chemical cocktail of polybrominated diphenyl ethers, PBDES for short. These compounds were added to fabrics to make them melt instead of burn, which sounds safe. Until you realize the fumes were toxic, the materials didn't breathe, and the chemicals absorbed right through your skin. Studies later linked PBDEs to hormone disruption, developmental delays, and even behavioral issues. And we were wearing them every night. In summer, they clung to sweaty skin like a wet plastic bag. In winter, they sparked with static and held onto every scent in the house. Parents meant well. They were doing what the labels told them. But science eventually caught up, and those pajamas quietly disappeared from store shelves. Today, you'd be hard-pressed to find a kid's outfit with those same flame-retardant additives. But back in the 70s, if it said safe, people trusted it, even if it smelled like melted crayons. And just beyond the back door, an even bigger danger was sprayed on like a blessing. Lawn chemicals with DDT were sprayed across suburban America like miracle dust. In the 1970s, lush green grass was practically a status symbol, and DDT was the secret weapon. It promised to kill bugs, weeds, and just about anything that dared disturb your tidy front yard. Garden hoses were connected to chemical sprayers, and entire blocks smelled like synthetic citrus and poison. Nobody warned you to stay inside. In fact, kids ran barefoot through freshly treated lawns, chasing sprinklers and dodging dandelions while their skin soaked in the residue. Pets rolled in it, parents barbecued on it, and when rain hit, those chemicals went straight into the sidewalk gutters. DDT had already raised alarms in scientific circles, but in neighborhoods everywhere, it was just another tool in the garage. The packaging featured sunny lawns and happy families, not skulls or warnings. It wasn't uncommon to see a bottle of weed killer sitting on the porch next to the lemonade. By the late 1970s, it was banned for agricultural use in the United States. But traces lingered in soil and water for years. It affected birds, fish, children, pretty much everything it touched. Today, DDT is infamous for its lasting environmental impact and connection to declining wildlife populations. But back then, it was just part of Saturday chores. And if your lawn didn't smell like chemicals, your furniture definitely did. Formaldehyde in foam insulation and furniture was the invisible guest in every camper van, basement rec room, and mid-century couch. You could smell it in the musty air of grandma's guest bedroom, or the slightly sharp scent inside every mobile home. That chemical wasn't just floating around, it was baked into the foam of seat cushions, the glue holding together your faux wood paneling, and the insulation packed behind the walls. It was cheap, effective, and everywhere. But it also off-gassed like a slow leak, seeping into your lungs while you watched television or napped on a vinyl recliner. Exposure caused watery eyes, skin rashes, sore throats, and, in prolonged cases, respiratory issues and even cancer. The furniture looked modern and sleek, but the air inside many homes became a ticking time bomb. Some people chalked it up to new couch smell and thought nothing of it. But formaldehyde didn't care about aesthetics. The government didn't start cracking down until health complaints poured in from mobile home parks and campers where levels spiked through the roof. And even then, warnings were vague. Back then, though, it was just that smell people got used to. And if your living room wasn't fuming, your scalp might have been, especially if you were chasing those pin-straight 70s hair goals. Hair straighteners with lye were the beauty industry's harshest secret, one that sat in bathrooms across the country disguised as progress. These chemical relaxers promised sleek, shiny hair with just a few burns on the side. The active ingredient? Sodium hydroxide, also known as lye, also known as the stuff used to clear clogged drains. It worked by literally breaking down your hair's natural bonds and rebuilding them into a straighter shape. You'd slather it on, wait with burning ears and stinging eyes, then rinse and pray your scalp still had skin. It was marketed as a home solution, with smiling women on the box, but behind the scenes, stylists kept tubs of petroleum jelly nearby to treat the inevitable chemical burns. The instructions said to leave it on for X minutes, but that depended on your pain tolerance. Lye burns didn't just hurt, they lingered. And if you left it on too long, hair fell out in clumps. The bathroom would fill with a sharp chemical scent, and your towel would be lined with strands. But the sleek results were addicting. You'd endure the pain for the promise of a smoother silhouette. And while your head might sting, your lunchbox could have been slowly serving up a whole other kind of danger. Vinyl lunchboxes containing lead were every kid's badge of honor. Whether it had Wonder Woman, Star Wars, or a rainbow unicorn on the front, that box said everything about who you were at recess. But while you were showing off your new thermos or trading cookies, your PB&J might have been marinating in something less appetizing: lead. Many of those colorful, flexible vinyl cases were made with lead-based plastic stabilizers, materials that could leach over time, especially under heat. Left in the sun on a bus seat, that lunchbox became a mini toxic oven. Some even had peeling interiors that kids would pick at with fingers destined for mouths. Nobody suspected their sandwich container might be the real health hazard. Years later, testing revealed just how widespread the contamination was, and many were recalled. But by then, millions had used them daily. Schools didn't warn parents, teachers didn't know, and the kids, they just knew lunch was inside. And if the danger wasn't in your lunchbox, it might have been humming in the ceiling above your head. PCBs in electrical devices were practically ACL materials, non-flammable, chemically stable, and fantastic at insulating electricity, but also toxic to humans, wildlife, and everything in between. Schools, offices, and homes with fluorescent lighting often had PCBs lurking in the ballasts overhead. When the ballasts overheated or leaked, those oily fluids dripped into ceilings, carpets, and classrooms without warning. Touch it, breathe it, or get near it, and it could enter your body like an uninvited guest. Linked to everything from skin conditions to liver damage and cancer, PCBs were slowly banned through the late 70s and early 80s. But in their heyday, they were hailed as futuristic and advanced. We trusted the hum. We trusted the glow. And speaking of trust, television had a voice back then, and it was cool, smooth, and selling you cigarettes. Cigarette ads on television in the 1970s were less like commercials and more like Hollywood trailers. A smooth-talking cowboy rode into the sunset, puffing away like it was the secret to happiness. Doctors in lab coats said smoking was fine. Cartoon camels winked at kids between Saturday morning shows. These weren't just ads, they were cultural icons. Brands like Winston, Marlboro, and Lucky Strike had jingles stuck in your head longer than the smoke in your hair. Primetime slots weren't reserved for family programming. They were for soft jazz, rugged men, and slow-motion exhales. Cigarette companies didn't just sell tobacco. They sold cool. They sold freedom. And they did it straight into American living rooms during dinner. By 1971, the U.S. government finally banned these ads from TV and radio, recognizing how deeply they influenced public health. But the damage was already done. An entire generation had grown up believing a smoke break was glamorous. And just like the airwaves, the very air we breathed indoors was often saturated with danger, from sources a lot less obvious than a cigarette. Carbon tetrachloride in cleaning products was the silent helper under every kitchen sink. You probably never saw the name on the bottle, but it was in there, doing its job in spot removers, fire extinguishers, and dry cleaning solvents. It evaporated quickly, had no strong smell, and cut through grease like magic. Housewives used it without a second thought, trusting the promises of sparkling countertops and stain-free clothes. It was so common, people kept it in spray bottles, poured it directly on rugs, or wiped it across oven doors. But what no one saw was how it worked its way into lungs and livers. Carbon tetrachloride is now known to cause liver failure, kidney damage, and central nervous system depression. And it's considered a probable human carcinogen. OSHA eventually slammed the brakes, but not before decades of exposure left a long legacy. We trusted the labels, we trusted the results. But even art supplies had their own set of hidden hazards, and the next one made every school art room smell like danger. Spray fixative for art containing benzene gave every elementary art class that weird industrial edge. If you ever made a charcoal sketch or pastel masterpiece, chances are someone gave it a glossy finish with a fixative spray that doubled as a mini chemical hazard. The stuff smelled strong, like sharp varnish and nail polish remover had a baby, and teachers would often wave their hands around it saying, "Don't breathe too much of this in." But in rooms with no ventilation, that was easier said than done. Benzene was the key ingredient in many of those sprays, prized for its quick-drying power and ability to seal artwork without smudging. But what wasn't advertised on the can? Benzene is highly flammable, causes bone marrow suppression, and has been definitively linked to leukemia. Art classes were basically low-grade hazmat zones. Eventually, safer alternatives were developed, and benzene was restricted or banned from most consumer products. Still, the damage lingered. For many kids, the smell of creativity was also the smell of chemical exposure. And while we're on the topic of childhood routines, let's talk about the daily boiling ritual that now sounds downright medieval. Glass baby bottles with rubber nipples were the parenting standard of the time. No fancy sterilizers, no microwave steam bags. Just a pot of boiling water on the stove, a handful of bottles, and a prayer you didn't melt the rubber or scald yourself. These bottles were sturdy, heavy, and dangerously slick when wet. The rubber nipples had a faint, plastic meets rubber scent that never quite left, no matter how many times you rinsed them. If one fell, it shattered. If you lost a nipple ring, good luck finding a replacement before dinner. But this was the norm. Parents spent a surprising amount of time tending to bottle paraphernalia like lab technicians. Eventually, plastic took over, but even that came with its own controversies: BPA, phthalates, and microplastics. Modern parents may have fewer shards to deal with, but also face new concerns. Back then, it was simple: glass, rubber, boil, repeat. But for all the risks inside the kitchen, some of the most dangerous moments happened in plain sight, on the sidewalk, in the yard, or right outside your front door. Toy guns that looked exactly like real ones were a staple of 1970s childhood. Kids ran through neighborhoods playing cops and robbers with replica revolvers that had metal frames, wood-style grips, and no orange safety tips. These toys didn't just mimic real guns. They practically were real guns without the ability to fire. Some had weight, some made realistic sounds, and others had loading chambers that looked straight out of a Western. Parents didn't think twice. They were just toys. But law enforcement often couldn't tell the difference. Tragic misunderstandings occurred, and by the 1980s and 1990s, regulations stepped in to require safety markings and visual distinctions. Today's toy guns look neon and soft on purpose, but back then, authenticity was the goal. They were cool, they were dangerous, and they were everywhere. But they weren't the only everyday item hiding a global threat, because the next topic quite literally changed the atmosphere. Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, and aerosol sprays were in everything from your mom's hairspray to your dad's deodorant, and back then, nobody thought twice about it. You'd hold the can, press the nozzle, and hear that satisfying pshht as a cloud of product filled the bathroom like a fog machine. It was all part of the routine: style, spray, suffocate. The scent lingered, the mist settled, and somewhere high above the earth, the ozone layer took another hit. CFCs were hailed as miracle propellants, but they were also silent saboteurs, breaking down ozone molecules and letting ultraviolet radiation pour in. It wasn't until scientists noticed a literal hole forming over Antarctica that the alarm bells rang, and suddenly the hairspray that made your bangs defy gravity didn't seem so harmless anymore. By the late 1980s, global treaties stepped in, banning or phasing out CFCs in favor of safer alternatives. Today's aerosol cans may still mist, but they don't punch holes in the sky. Still, if we're talking about scents that stuck around, sometimes in your nostrils, sometimes in your brain, the next culprit was in your pencil box. Scented magic markers with toxic solvents were the unsupervised fun nobody warned you about. They came in packs that smelled like a candy store, with each color labeled by flavor: cherry, licorice, blueberry, lemon. Kids passed them around like scratch and sniff stickers, scribbling in workbooks and then immediately holding the tip an inch from their nose for a big whiff. The problem? The scents weren't from actual fruit. They were from chemical solvents. Some of the original markers contained toluene and xylene, industrial-grade fumes that were more at home in a paint shop than a second-grade classroom. Teachers joked about kids getting high on markers, but it wasn't always a joke. While they weren't strong enough to cause real harm in casual use, repeated sniffing could cause dizziness and nausea, and in high enough doses, serious neurological issues. Eventually, the formulas were reformulated, replacing the risky solvents with kid-safe alternatives. But back in the day, the only warning label was, "Do not ingest." That didn't stop anyone from coloring their nose red and calling themselves Rudolph. And if you thought sniffing markers was sketchy, wait until you hear what was hiding in your cereal bowl. Banned food dyes like red dye. Number 2 were once sprinkled into everything fun: sodas, candies, breakfast cereals, even maraschino cherries. If it was bright and artificial, red dye number 2 probably had something to do with it. The shade was electric, almost glowing, and it turned even the most boring snack into a psychedelic experience. But behind the rainbow hues was a harsh reality. Studies in the 1970s linked the dye to tumor growth in lab animals, and although the evidence was debated, it was enough to cause widespread concern. In 1976, the FDA pulled the plug, banning the dye in food products across the United States. Suddenly, pink snacks vanished, red candy went dull, and cherry pie filling looked suspiciously beige. It was the end of an era for neon food. Since then, more artificial dyes have come under scrutiny, leading to stricter regulations and a push for natural alternatives. But back then, if your cereal didn't leave a red ring in the milk, was it even worth eating? Still, food wasn't the only thing that turned out to be a little too potent, because some baby powders did more than just soothe. Teething powders with narcotics were once tucked into diaper bags like they were no big deal. Fussy baby? Gum sore? No problem. Just rub a little powder along their gums and wait for the magic to kick in. These powders were sold over the counter and marketed as gentle relief for teething pain. What the labels didn't always say: some formulas contained traces of morphine, heroin derivatives, or other opium-based ingredients. Sure, the baby stopped crying, but now you had a sedated infant who might not wake up for hours. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, these powders were wildly popular. Even well into the 1970s, certain brands still used codeine or other controlled substances in low doses. It wasn't until decades of advocacy and medical horror stories surfaced that governments cracked down. By the 1980s and beyond, these powders were pulled, reformulated, or banned outright. Today, parents reach for chilled teething rings, baby acetaminophen, and gels approved by pediatricians. But back then, it was just another item in the cabinet, right next to the whiskey your grandpa swore helped too. And if the indoor risks weren't enough, some of the worst offenders were right there in your backyard. Outdoor burning barrels for trash were a fixture in alleys, backyards, and rural driveways all across America. Too much garbage for the weekly pickup? Just light it up. These steel drums were blackened with soot, surrounded by crumpled newspaper, half-melted plastic jugs, and the occasional flaming cereal box. There were no emissions controls, no permits, just a match, a breeze, and the hope it wouldn't blow toward your neighbor's laundry line. Some folks even roasted marshmallows nearby, totally unaware they were inhaling dioxins, carbon monoxide, and toxic ash. These barrels were smoky, smelly, and, in hindsight, incredibly dangerous. Fires spread, children got burned, toxic fumes settled on gardens and pets. Eventually, local governments and the EPA stepped in, banning backyard burning in most municipalities due to the health risks and pollution concerns. But for years, this was just how you got rid of stuff. No trash service required. And if you think a rusty barrel was bad, some homes had an even more intense setup built right into the property. Home incinerators were the suburban solution to taking out the trash, by literally lighting it on fire. These backyard furnaces were built right into concrete patios or tucked behind garages, complete with metal grates, chimneys, and a fire poker that doubled as a marshmallow stick on weekends. You'd toss in your paper plates, old socks, milk cartons, even leftover casserole if it smelled weird. Strike a match, and boom, problem solved. The smoke poured out in thick gray ribbons, and nobody blinked. Some folks even bragged about how hot theirs burned. There were no filters, no containment, no second thoughts. It was just out of sight, out of smell, out of mind. Of course, the air told a different story, loaded with particulates, ash, and toxic chemicals wafting over the neighbors' rose bushes. Eventually, science and rising asthma rates caught up, and home incinerators were banned or dismantled across most towns. But while some dangers smoldered in the backyard, others waited right where kids were supposed to have the most fun. Hard plastic playground equipment with sharp edges was every kid's jungle gym, and every parent's panic attack. These towering structures looked innocent enough. Bright colors, wobbly bridges, maybe a twisty slide, but get close, and you'd find sun-bleached plastic splintering at the corners, jagged seams from manufacturing, and bolts sticking out just enough to scrape an elbow. They weren't anchored with foam or safety mulch, just concrete or gravel, sometimes nothing at all. And on hot days, that plastic could brand you like a waffle iron. Monkey bars were higher, swings were longer, and slides shot you off like a human cannonball. We climbed them barefoot, raced to the top, and inevitably took a tumble that ended with a skinned knee or worse. Helmets? Optional? Supervision? Spotty. But the bruises came with bragging rights. Eventually, after a few too many ER visits, safety standards caught up and the hard plastic was phased out. But if you think that was a rough ride, the next one literally involved chasing clouds of pesticide through your own neighborhood. Pesticide fogging trucks driving through neighborhoods was treated more like a parade than a public health hazard. You'd hear the low rumble coming from a few blocks away, then catch the faint chemical breeze as it rolled closer. Out came the bikes, the big wheels, the roller skates, because every kid knew this was your chance to ride through the fog. Never mind that it was DDT. Never mind that the smell burned your eyes. It looked like mist and felt like magic. The truck itself looked like a regular pickup, but from the back sprayed a thick white plume meant to coat every leaf, fence post, and swing set. Adults waved from porches. Kids zoomed in and out of the haze, pretending to be Ghostbusters or race car drivers. Nobody asked what was in it, and the people spraying it usually had no protective gear. It wasn't until the 1970s that DDT's link to cancer, birth defects, and environmental devastation became too large to ignore. Laws changed. Trucks disappeared. But ask anyone who grew up back then, and they'll tell you, chasing the fog was the best part of summer. And when you got sick afterward, there was always a spoonful of something sweet waiting in the medicine cabinet. Cough syrups with codeine sold over the counter were the miracle remedy that knocked a cold, and sometimes the kid, right out. You'd get the sniffles, and next thing you know, mom's reaching for that thick red bottle with the cheery label and a cap that somehow always got sticky. One spoonful, and the room felt fuzzier. 2 spoonfuls, nap time. These syrups didn't just soothe, they sedated. Codeine, a mild opiate, was used liberally in cold remedies for both kids and adults, praised for its ability to calm a hacking cough and help everyone in the house sleep better. Some even tasted good, like cherry cola or bubble gum. But the sleepy side effects were often overlooked: constipation, confusion, and in rare cases, respiratory distress. Over time, more and more doctors raised concerns about dependency and accidental overdose, especially in children. Regulations tightened. Prescriptions became mandatory. Today, you'll find milder alternatives on drugstore shelves, but none with the same knock-you-out punch. Of course, not every danger came in syrup form. Some came in clouds of hairspray and that one polish remover bottle every teenager kept in their bottom drawer. High VOC nail polish removers and hairsprays gave every bathroom the unmistakable scent of a chemistry lab. You'd walk in and immediately get hit with that potent, nose-tingling blast. Acetone, alcohol, lacquer, and whatever mystery fumes the beauty industry was bottling at the time. Nail polish remover could peel through paint. Hairspray could freeze a bouffant in place through a tornado. And together, they turned every beauty routine into a fire hazard with a side of lung irritation. Most of these products were loaded with volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which evaporated into the air and turned your home into a low-level hazard zone. Dizziness, headaches, even nervous system effects were common with long-term exposure. But back then, that scent was just mom getting ready or big sister doing her nails before prom. We cracked a window and called it good. Eventually, health organizations clamped down and new formulas were introduced with fewer fumes and flammable ingredients. But those heavy aerosol cans and glass bottles still haunt antique vanities. And if the fumes didn't get you, the fire risk might. Thankfully, we've come a long way from primping inside a toxic cloud. Asbestos ironing board pads were sold as the safe, high-tech solution for smooth shirts and crisp collars. Heat-resistant, durable, and perfect for avoiding scorched fabrics. They were hailed as a homemaker's dream. But underneath that calm surface, danger was woven right in. Each time you pressed your iron down, tiny asbestos fibers could rise up like invisible ghosts and float through the air, just waiting to be inhaled. Back then, asbestos was everywhere. Floor tiles, insulation, and yes, even the place where you laid your dress shirts. These ironing pads didn't just survive heat, they absorbed it, radiated it, and spread microscopic fibers every time they cracked or frayed. The scary part? No one knew. People used them for years, pressing garment after garment, slowly breathing in particles that would later be linked to serious illnesses. It was domestic life disguised as risk management. And there was no warning label, no raised eyebrow at the store. Some hazards were sweet, powdery, and sold right next to the gumdrops, like tiny, sugary sticks that made smoking look cool before you could even spell nicotine. There was no sound more powerful in the 1970s than the delicate, distant jingle of the ice cream truck. Except, it was not a jingle the way we hear it today through tinny speakers and digital loops. No, back then, the ice cream man had real brass bells. He would slowly drive down the block, gently ringing them by hand or with a string attached to the window. The sound was soft but unmistakable. It sliced through summer air like a siren of salvation. Kids would freeze mid-game, mid-bite, or a mid-sentence and yell, "Ice cream!" before bolting toward the noise barefoot, clutching whatever spare change they could dig up from a kitchen drawer or the couch cushions. The menu on the side of the truck was like a stained glass window of dreams. Push pops, rocket bombs, orange creamsicles. And if you were lucky enough to have a full dollar, you might even walk away with a cartoon character bar with gumdrop eyes that always looked just a little off. The magic was not just the treat. It was the chase, the chaos, the moment. You did not schedule a visit to the ice cream truck. You hunted it. But if you wanted to feel truly rich as a kid, it did not involve frozen sweets. It happened in the aisles of the grocery store, with something you could not eat, but you definitely collected. If you wanted to feel indestructible in the 1970s, you bought a retired checker cab and drove it like your own private limousine. These things were built like bunkers, steel frames, giant bench seats, enough legroom to host a yoga class. They were meant to haul passengers all day, every day, and because of that, they could take an unbelievable beating. When cities started retiring their fleets, the used cabs hit the market for dirt cheap, and everyday people scooped them up like hotcakes. You could legally register one as a personal vehicle, no questions asked. It was not unusual to see a checker cab parked in a suburban driveway, its faded yellow paint barely covered by an amateur paint job. They were impossible to miss and nearly impossible to wreck. Safety standards? They were considered built-in by sheer size and weight. Of course, they guzzled gas like nobody's business and cornered like a refrigerator on wheels, but hey, that was a small price to pay for invincibility. Eventually, they disappeared, retired for good. And speaking of unusual rides, let us not forget about the street-legal tuk-tuks and rickshaws that once rolled through American tourist towns like they belonged there. Before Fandango or streaming apps told us what was playing, there was the operator. And calling the theater was an event in itself. You would dial a number, usually a long one, and wait as a robotic voice or sometimes an actual person listed off every movie and showtime like it was the State of the Union. Showtimes for the weekend of July 24th, Gremlins at 7:30, The Goonies at 9:15, Ghostbusters at 10:45. You could not skip ahead. You had to listen carefully, and maybe even write it down if you were planning a big night. If someone in the house picked up the phone while you were listening, forget it. You had to start over. And if you called during a busy hour, good luck hearing anything over the static and background noise. But it was still exciting. The build-up, the anticipation. You felt like you were about to join something important, something bigger than yourself. Because back then, watching a movie meant going somewhere. It meant tickets, seats, sticky floors, and that one kid who always threw popcorn. It meant magic. But if you wanted movie magic at home, you did not need a theater. You just needed to clear your schedule, grab the good blanket, and stake your claim on the couch. Toy helicopters in the 1980s were mechanical marvels and total mayhem. They came with battery packs, long plastic wires, and a launch mechanism that would send a spinning metal-bladed helicopter screaming through the air at top speed. These choppers weren't made of foam. They had real weight, real torque, and real potential to slice through your bangs. Every kid had the same goal: launch it as high as possible. Every adult had the same reaction: duck and cover. The metal blades would spin with enough force to cut skin, tangle in hair, or put a dent in your wood paneling. Worst part? Some came with combat attachments like pretend missiles or landing claws, because nothing screams safe fun like turning your living room into an active airspace. Stories of black eyes, forehead welts, and chipped teeth piled up fast. Eventually, manufacturers were forced to swap out metal parts for plastic, reduce power, and add so many warning labels it looked like the back of a shampoo bottle. But by then, the damage was done, literally. If your brain managed to survive the helicopter hits, good luck keeping it safe with the art supplies that followed. You knew a toy was unforgettable when it lingered in your dreams, or maybe your nightmares. Hugo, Man of a Thousand Faces, was that toy. It was not soft or cuddly. It was a bald, plastic, mannequin-style head with eyes that seemed a little too real. And you could change its face. No, really. You got this kit full of rubbery noses, scars, mustaches, eyebrows, eye patches, and even glasses to transform Hugo into anything from a movie villain to a Cold War spy. You applied the features with a kind of glue stick that felt halfway between a craft tool and something out of a mad scientist's lab. This was not a toy you brought to bed with you. It was one you studied, experimented with, maybe even tried to prank your sibling with. There was something fascinating and just a bit unsettling about it. And yet, you kept going back to it. You made stories around those disguises, invented entire secret agent missions with Hugo at the center. Back in the 1970s, your imagination did most of the heavy lifting. That was the magic. And if you really wanted to get creative, especially in October, you did not go to the store for a costume. You went to the kitchen junk drawer, the recycling bin, and maybe the attic. Television antennas in the 1960s were a test of both engineering skill and sheer audacity. You'd climb up on the roof with a giant metal rod, twist it until the static cleared, and shout down to someone inside for feedback. A little to the left. No, now it's worse. Back the other way. It was like guiding a spaceship with zero safety precautions. Most of these antennas weren't grounded properly. That meant if lightning struck, and it did, it would travel straight through the antenna, down the roof, and into your home. More than one dad became an unexpected conductor trying to adjust the Sunday game signal mid-storm. Even without lightning, a fall from the roof was a very real danger. These weren't lightweight aluminum poles. They were heavy, sharp-edged contraptions bolted to chimneys or mounted precariously with hopes and prayers. Some families installed them with rope and ladders. Others just sent up the most agile family member. Signal boosts meant the difference between watching your favorite show and enduring snow-filled fuzz, so the risk seemed worth it. But what started as a harmless adjustment often turned into a near-death experience. And if you think the antenna was risky, just wait until you remember the glue that smelled so strong it knocked kids out before the models were even finished. In the 1970s, tourist towns across America fell in love with the exotic charm of tuk-tuks and rickshaws, those little three-wheeled wonders that looked more at home in Bangkok than on a beachfront boulevard in Florida. But there they were, buzzing around like mosquito-sized taxis, legally driving alongside full-sized cars and trucks. Some were imported directly from Asia. Others were homemade contraptions cobbled together in backyard sheds using scooter engines and whatever metal scraps were lying around. They barely had suspension. Their top speed was a hopeful 25 miles per hour, and turning corners felt like rolling dice. But city officials thought they were charming, tourists loved them, and for a brief moment, they were as American as funnel cake. You could drive one of these with nothing more than a regular driver's license and a little bit of nerve. No airbags, no crumple zones, no real doors, and sometimes no roof either. They were part carnival ride, part cab, and somehow fully legal. Eventually, rising safety concerns and tighter import regulations shut them down on public streets, pushing them into novelty rides at festivals or private events. Still, for a while, you really could get picked up from your hotel in a tuk-tuk. And if that sounds sketchy, imagine cruising through a rainstorm in a car that did not even come with windshield wipers. Owning a Trapper Keeper in the 1980s felt like owning a briefcase made just for kids, but with neon colors, Velcro, and personality. These were not just folders. These were statements. You did not just store your homework in a Trapper Keeper. You stored your identity. From bold geometric designs to wild illustrations of race cars, dolphins, or laser grids that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie, the outside of your Trapper Keeper said something about you. And that satisfying rip of the Velcro? That was music. It had pockets for pencils, slots for notes, compartments you never used but felt cooler just knowing they were there. There was something so absurdly organized about them that it made you want to turn your life into a schedule. You would write the dates on your notebook dividers, color code your subjects, and then forget all of it by Wednesday. But hey, the effort was there. You felt important carrying one around. It made you feel like you were growing up, and even if you never opened it for anything other than doodling weird cartoons during math class, it still felt like a win. But when it came to keeping track of things, there was one object that really made you feel like a collector, and not just of stuff, but of memories. Glow-in-the-dark stickers in the 1980s were the ultimate bedroom accessory. Stars, moons, alien decals. You'd slap them all over your ceiling and bask in the celestial glow every night. But here's the fun part. Some of them were literally radioactive. To get that long-lasting shine, certain manufacturers used phosphorescent paint that contained trace amounts of radium or tritium, materials that should have come with a Geiger counter, not a sheet of stickers. Sure, it looked magical at bedtime, but it was emitting low levels of radiation while you slept 2 feet below it. Parents had no clue. Kids loved it. And meanwhile, your space room was quietly setting off alarm bells in a future safety inspector's mind. As awareness of radiation risks grew, these glow-in-the-dark paints were pulled off the market or reformulated with safer alternatives. But the damage? Already done in bedrooms across the country. While that glow was subtle, The next invention didn't mess around. It promised to melt fat with the power of electricity. If there was ever a book that made kids believe in magic, it was the Sears Christmas Wish book. Thick, glossy, and practically glowing with possibility, it dropped into your mailbox like a brick of joy every fall. You did not read it. You devoured it. The toy section alone could occupy an afternoon. You would flip through each page slowly, pen in hand, circling dreams like you were planning a heist. Bikes, action figures, dolls with blinking eyes, remote control cars the size of shoe boxes. It was all in there. You would fold corners, make notes, maybe even leave it open to the exact page your heart was set on and hope your parents noticed. This was not just a catalog. It was a seasonal ritual. The pages felt endless. Even if you never got the big-ticket items, it did not matter. Half the fun was imagining what you could get. And if you had siblings, you better believe there were rules about who got to look at it first. Some houses had it down to a science. A few minutes each, no hogging. But all that joy had a flip side. Because nothing could snap you out of toy-filled daydreams quite like a certain buzzing sound from the television, the kind that made your heart drop even if you did not know why. Spray on Snow was a holiday must-have in the 1960s, a seasonal delight that turned every window into a frosted wonderland. Just shake the can, press the nozzle, and watch as fluffy white patterns appeared across the glass. It was festive, easy to use, and absolutely everywhere. The catch? That soft, pretty snow was often laced with lead-based pigment. Yep, neurotoxins right in the living room. Kids would draw smiley faces and snowflakes, breathing in fumes and getting it on their fingers before heading back to sip cocoa. Parents sprayed entire windows from top to bottom, unaware that every jolly doodle came with a microscopic health warning. When the holidays were over, wiping it off meant smearing fine white dust all over the furniture, and sometimes even using dry cloths that kicked it up into the air again. It stuck to glass, to hands, and to memories. Photos from the era show smiling kids standing in front of the stuff, glowing with seasonal pride and unknowingly inhaling trace amounts of heavy metals. Eventually, safer versions appeared on the market. But for a while, decorating windows was more toxic than tinsel. And if the snow spray didn't get you, the bed you fell asleep on might, because some kids literally snoozed on pillows filled with flammable fluff. If you were a kid in the 1970s and you did not have a gas-powered mini bike, were you even really living? These things were like pocket-sized motorcycles. No license required, no helmets expected, and no real supervision in sight. You would see kids as young as 10 zipping down sidewalks, through alleyways, and even across busy intersections, acting like they were in some kind of stunt show. The engines were loud, the brakes were questionable, and the safety gear was usually just a baseball cap. But nobody really cared. Parents would wave from the porch and tell them to be home by dinner. And the best part? These bikes were cheap enough that a few months of lawn mowing or paper routes could get you one. Police might stop and give a warning, but more often than not, they would just shrug and let you ride. It was pure chaos disguised as childhood freedom. Today, if you so much as start one of these in a neighborhood, someone is calling the authorities before you hit second gear. But back then, it was just how kids got around. Now imagine that same freedom, but with full-grown adults riding choppers that looked more like medieval jousting weapons than actual motorcycles. Taping songs off the radio was a sacred mission. You would sit for hours next to your boombox, finger hovering over the record button, praying that the next song would be the one. And when it was, you had one shot to catch it clean, no static, no interruptions, and above all, no DJ talking over the intro. But of course, they always did. The opening notes would hit, your heart would race, and just as you hit record, that was the latest from Madonna. Coming up next, we've got... And just like that, your perfect mixtape moment was ruined. You would yell at the radio like the DJ could hear you. Why? Why do you do this to me? It was a battle of timing and nerves. Some kids got sneaky and recorded during the night shift when the hosts were quieter. Others became masters of timing, predicting when the chorus would drop, when the ad break would hit. It took real skill. And even if you missed a few seconds of the intro, you still labeled the tape like it was gold. You were not just building a playlist, you were capturing a moment. Free music, sure, but earned through effort, patience, and pure willpower. And if you were serious about your song collection, you were not stopping at one track. You were building an entire soundscape, one emotional banger at a time. Saturday mornings in the 1970s were sacred. You did not sleep in. You woke up early, grabbed the biggest bowl you could find, filled it with sugary cereal, and plopped down in front of the television. This was not just a casual routine. It was a ritual. You only had a few golden hours before the grown-up programs kicked in, and every second counted. The lineup? Legendary. Looney Tunes, Scooby-Doo, the Super Friends, the Jetsons. But nestled between the slapstick and sound effects were something sneakier: public service announcements. You would be watching Bugs Bunny one minute, and the next, a little cartoon light bulb wearing sneakers would hop on screen singing, "I'm just a Bill." Suddenly, you were learning about how laws were made and the importance of brushing your teeth, all while still chewing on marshmallow shapes. And somehow, it worked. Time for Timer told you about cheese and crackers. Schoolhouse Rock gave you grammar. These messages were as much a part of your childhood as the shows themselves. They blended right into the backdrop of your Saturday, like static in between the channels. You did not always understand them, but you remembered them. And as soon as you heard the first jingle in the distance, the real fun began. Because there was something coming that could get every kid off the couch in seconds. Home hair dryers in the 1960s looked like they came straight from a beauty salon, but without any of the safety checks. These early models had bulky hoods or handheld nozzles, often with thick cords that frayed faster than a worn shoelace. You'd plug them into the wall, perch near the bathroom sink, and hope for the best. No ground wires, no insulation. Just you, your wet hair, and a live current a sneeze away from disaster. The metal casing got hot. The motors sparked occasionally. And heaven help you if your fingers were damp. Water plus faulty wiring? That hairdo could turn into a fireworks show. Yet people trusted them because that sleek salon look felt worth the risk. Back then, it was just another day in the name of glamour. But if electricity was playing with fire, what we put directly on wounds wasn't much better, especially when it came in a bright red bottle with a mercury surprise. Back in the 1970s, monster trucks were not just something you saw at arena shows. They were rolling through neighborhoods like local legends. Drivers would lift their trucks sky high with no thought to rollover danger, center of gravity, or whether they could actually park the thing in their own driveway. Tires the size of bathtubs? Absolutely. No visible license plate? Who was looking? There were no limits to how high you could lift your suspension or how ridiculous your truck looked. If you needed a ladder to get in, you were doing it right. Police officers rarely pulled them over because, honestly, it was not even illegal yet. No one was worried about crash test ratings or pedestrian safety zones, and the idea of stability control was still hanging out in a notebook somewhere in Detroit. Today, height restrictions and suspension laws make sure your ride does not double as a climbing wall. But back then, the bigger the better, and the louder, the cooler. Speaking of things that would make today's DMV faint, let us talk about tractors. Yes, actual tractors, cruising down country roads without plates or papers. Speak and Spell, a name so simple, you almost forget just how advanced it felt. This little orange learning machine had a robotic voice that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The keys were rubbery. The screen was a small LED display, and the second it powered on, you felt like a kid genius. This was not just a toy, it was a computer. At least to us it was. And for a lot of people, it was the first time they ever heard a machine talk to them like a teacher would. It would ask you to spell elephant or photograph in that slow, mechanical voice. If you got it wrong, it would buzz like you had just activated some kind of self-destruct sequence. And if you nailed it, that same robotic voice gave you praise like it meant something, like it knew you. Speak and Spell was part game, part lesson, and 100% magic. You did not need Wi-Fi. You did not need batteries half the time. All you needed was the imagination to believe that this talking toy was the smartest machine in the house. And sometimes, it probably was. Of course, intelligence was one thing, but style? That was another story. If you were the kid with this next item, everyone knew you had your life together. Slap bracelets were the forbidden fruit of every 1980s classroom. One second they were straight, the next, snap, they wrapped around your wrist like a coiled snake with attitude. Covered in neon fabric, animal print, or glitter, they looked innocent enough. But underneath the fun was a thin strip of spring steel that had one job: launch at high speed and curve mid-air. The problem? That metal core wasn't exactly kid-proof. If the fabric wore down, that hidden strip turned into a razor-thin whip. Kids ended up with deep scratches, cuts, and in some cases, open wounds. Teachers confiscated them. Parents complained. Schools banned them faster than you could say, Lisa Frank. Still, the appeal was undeniable. There was something addictive about that sharp snap on your wrist, like your bracelet had a personality of its own. Toy companies tried to fix the design, adding thicker fabric and safety tabs. But by then, the damage was done, and so were dozens of kids' sleeves, wrists, and friendships. And while slap bracelets left marks on your arm, the next trend turned your living room into a slow-motion air hazard. Phones in the 1970s were not private, not even close. They had cords, long spiral ones that stretched down hallways, wrapped around doors, and somehow always ended up tangled. Every house had one line, maybe two if you were fancy. That meant when the phone rang, it was anyone's guess who would answer and who would listen. If you were a kid trying to call a friend, you had to pass through a gauntlet of parents and siblings just to get 5 minutes of conversation. And if you were a teenager, good luck. Eavesdropping was practically a sport. Someone would quietly pick up another receiver and breathe like a horror movie villain. You would hear that subtle click and knew you were not alone. "Get off the phone" became a daily soundtrack, and heaven help you if someone else needed the line. "I'm expecting a call" meant you had to wrap it up, no matter what life-changing gossip you were in the middle of. There was no voicemail, no caller ID. If you missed a call, it was just gone. But if you wanted real independence as a kid, you had to earn it. And for many, that meant waking up while it was still dark, grabbing a heavy canvas bag and heading out into the cold. Clackers were 2 acrylic or glass balls tied to a string and handed to children with no safety warnings and a full green light. You'd hold the middle of the string, swing the balls upward and downward until they collided above and below your hand, producing that iconic clack-clack sound. It looked simple. It sounded addictive. It was also a hazard waiting to happen. The plastic versions could chip. The glass ones could shatter. And if you missed your rhythm, one ball went rogue, swinging at eyebrow height with all the grace of a wrecking ball. Kids practiced for hours, trying to get the timing right, turning every playground into a percussion concert of risk. Parents shrugged. Teachers banned them. Hospitals stocked up on ice packs and gauze. But still, they were cool. Until one clack too many ended in sharp pieces flying through the air. Eventually, safety commissions pulled them off shelves. But back then, one broken pair just meant you were in the market for another. And if that seemed dangerous, wait till you hear about people putting flammable foam containers directly onto gas stoves like it was just another Tuesday. Believe it or not, in the 1970s, it was possible to drive a brand new vehicle or a custom-built kit car without windshield wipers or washers. Some models, especially custom or minimalist designs, just left them out entirely. It sounds impossible today, but at the time, they were not always considered essential safety equipment. Builders prioritized style and speed over visibility and common sense. You might see a slick fiberglass roadster with chrome finishes and not a single way to clean the windshield. Drivers would keep a rag on the dashboard and physically wipe the glass at stoplights, assuming they did not just lean out the window and squint through the rain. There were even people who used Rain X or wax to repel water and called it a solution. Inspectors? Barely existed in some states. Wiper blades were seen as optional for sunny day cruisers, and if you were unlucky enough to hit a downpour, well, You just pulled over and waited it out. Nowadays, having wipers is the bare minimum requirement to get on the road, and most vehicles even have advanced washer systems with heated nozzles and speed-sensitive settings. But back then, if you were driving something custom or stripped down, you might not have even noticed they were missing until the clouds rolled in. You thought that was risky. Just wait until we get into the world of go-karts with lawnmower engines tearing up the neighborhood streets. If you remember using any of these, you definitely lived through the wildest safety trial run in history. Hit like, drop your favorite memory in the comments, and subscribe for more blasts from the past.